Welcome to the Way Out Recovery Hour and happy Monday. I'm Bob Sheritz, and we have a really exciting show for you today. I want to remind everyone who's out there that we call this Gratitude Monday, or we call it Motivational Monday. You know, Monday's a little bit tough for people. We're looking at this big old week, and I want to remind everyone to take a moment to just be grateful for what you have. We have this beautiful big old week sitting in front of us. So let's change our attitude about Monday. And now that you've tuned into the show, you get a little reminder of that. We are brought to you by The Way Out. We are an intensive outpatient program for adolescents, adults, and their families, located on the corner of Plum Canyons and Bouquet Canyon. Our phone number is 661-296-4444, and we are at thewayoutrrecoveryscv.com. So go to our website and look us up. Remember that asking for help is the first step, that if you're sitting out there listening to this show, or you've been thinking about, I really need help, or a family member needs help, it's never too late to call. Now is a really, really good time. If not us, reach out to somebody. Reach out to your clergyman, reach out to the sheriff's department, reach out to your teachers, reach out to a family member. But remember that asking for help is the first step, and that's where it all begins. We have, at the Way Out Recovery, we are a primary substance use disorder treatment center, and we deal with people that are suffering in that realm right there. But I'll tell you that when we take a step back and we look at the big picture of the impact of drugs and alcohol, prescription drugs, prescription medications, marijuana, alcohol, everything that comes in the realm of substance use disorder. When we take a step back and we look at the bigger impact, we can see that that there are many, many lives that are changed by it. Many times, not on purpose, the consequences that happen to others who aren't even using the drugs. We have a really, really big show today that is going to talk about some of those topics. We have in the studio with us today Assemblyman Tom Lackey. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Well, this is fun to be here.
Yeah, it's, I've been really excited looking forward to this show because we don't oftentimes get to look at a lot of the different laws and things that are in place, put in by and amended and looked at by lawmakers such as yourself. We generally look at just the treatment side of it. So it's a really big deal that we get to sort of explore what's going on in our world, especially with when it comes to medical and recreational uses of marijuana. That's a relatively new thing. It's not the medical marijuana laws have been around for, God, I think Prop 215 is almost 20 years old now.
It is over 20.
So it's been around for a very, very long time. But I think the difficulty that we, as a society have faced is to certainly look at the impacts and regulations and laws that come into effect and all the different things. And you and other lawmakers have been a champion in not only looking at those things, but revising some of the either current laws and ordinances and things like that, correct?
Yeah, it's been a great challenge. As you've indicated, drug usage is changing here in our society, as many things are changing. And the impairment and the threat to public safety is impacted by some of these changes. And so as lawmakers, we're trying to do the right thing to make sure that we're doing the responsible thing that will protect the innocent.
Right. So before we get into the issues, we're going to look at specifically a couple of different. Proposition 47, which was enacted a few years ago to reduce really the number of people that are in prisons for nonviolent crimes, such as petty thefts, minor drug offenses, possessions, things like that, and to reduce felonies down to misdemeanors. So we're going to look at some of the unintentional consequences of that proposition and how we are trying to sort of shore up the sides on that. And then we're also going to look at a little bit about Prop 215, but not so much into the medical side as much as Proposition 64, which is recreational use of marijuana. Okay. So we're going to look at those issues today. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Your history, how you end up as an assemblyman, You were with the Highway Patrol for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I'm a very fortunate person. I grew up in a small town not far from here, a little mining town called Boron, between Bakersfield and Barstow, and always wanted to be a highway patrolman. And I got my dream. I was able to join the Highway Patrol back in 1985. And back in that time, alcohol impairment was a pretty big threat, but it was not taken as seriously as it is today.
I think that was right at the time when they really started to enforce driving under the influence laws more so, correct? Right.
Yeah,
the
late 80s are when we went to the .08 standard. And so that was a big controversial jump, because back when I first came on in the mid 80s, people were still joking about, driving drunk and acting drunk. It was something to laugh about, and it's no longer. We understand the true threat that it brings and the tragedy it brings. And right now there's a bit of a misunderstanding about marijuana and or any drug as far as that goes, and how it impacts your ability to operate a motor vehicle safely. And my experience has been 28 years with the California Highway Patrol, and 20 of those 28 years was spent working the hours when most people are asleep, and that's when impaired driving seems to present itself more prevalently. So I believe I've got a great, unique experience pool to draw from, and we've been working ever since the day I got elected to try to bring more attention to this, because we believe the public deserves that.
Right, and even the terminology around driving while impaired. It used to be all you heard was drunk driving, drunk driving, drunk driving, and today we like to refer to it as impaired driving, because we're not just talking about alcohol. We are talking about prescription medications. We're talking about marijuana. We're talking about all other illicit drugs. That it's important for anyone to understand that if you are impaired in any way by any sort of a substance, that at some point that impairment will negatively impact the way that you can drive, and possibly negatively impact somebody else out there on the road. So we're talking about drugged driving, talking about impairment driving. I'll bet, the old myth is, and maybe some people still believe this, oh, marijuana doesn't do anything. I drive fine when I'm on it. It doesn't impair me at all. It's never killed anybody. I'll bet you in 28 years in the Highway Patrol, you've seen your fair number of tragedies as a result of not alcohol.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I made over 40 death notifications while working in the Antelope Valley. Not every one of those were involving impaired driving, but certainly too many of them were.
God, that's got to be a tough job right there.
There's no tougher.
Yeah.
There's nothing more difficult than sharing that kind of information with a loved one. But it also makes you understand the true gravity and the reality of this real threat. And as a matter of fact, when you hear people talk about and deny the impacts that cannabis or marijuana can actually have on a person, we have just a real recent tragedy that took place off of State Route 14, not far from here, where a man was working on the side of the freeway and an irresponsible driver came along, and there's evidence to believe that this person was under the influence of THC, and he took this man's life. And this brave survivor, his wife, came and testified up in Sacramento to our Public Safety Committee on this threat, and I believe that it had impact on the committee, because they could see the reality and the true danger that can actually result if we don't do the right thing.
Right. And you always, we always hate to hear about tragedies like that, but to hear that woman was able to go up and testify and try to get some laws enacted and try to get some changes made so that people aren't out there, that impacted everybody's life. I'm sure that the man, and it's still in court, so it's still alleged. However, I'll bet that man, before he got in his car, never thought for a minute, I probably shouldn't be driving. I've smoked a little bit, or whatever he did to get in that car that day. And certainly the family that lost their husband and their father that day didn't think that they were going to lose him as a result of that.
Yeah, that's the real tragedy with any kind of impaired driving. I think my experience has been, even when such tragedy occurs, as you have identified, very few of them really think that they're a real threat. They are thinking about some other thing, and the fact that they are impaired impairs their ability to use good judgment. And so there's always that danger that you may make decisions that are regrettable. And that's why we need to try to prevent. We need to really educate people and let them know, please, if you're going to medicate or if you're going to recreate using some substance, just please don't drive. Just please don't drive. Let somebody else drive, make some other plans. And it is that simple. That will save a tremendous amount of tragedy if we're able to successfully send that message.
Well, and as you and I sit here today, I think the most, we're going to go through a lot of information, but I think the most important thing that we can get out there, and I'll say this a couple of different times, is that if you're listening right now, to always be aware the medications that you take may impair you. Any amount of an intoxicant, whether it's alcohol, cannabis, or anything else that may impair you, that no amount in your system is not going to have an effect on your driving. So before you decide to use either medicinally or recreationally, have a plan. Decide for yourself that you're going to get somebody else to drive you if you need to go somewhere. Make sure that you're not going to get behind the wheel, because when you get behind the wheel under the influence of anything, I don't care what it is, on some level you're impaired. And if you have crossed into a level where that impairment is so much that you're dangerous out there, you could really impact somebody else's life and your own, and not mean to do that.
Yeah, because I could tell you that when we took drivers into custody after a tragedy, it is just really a heartbreak to see the tragedy that's associated with this poor judgment that a lot of people would say just as a small indiscretion. It really is not a small indiscretion. It's a huge indiscretion. And when these, thank heavens it doesn't happen every time when somebody shows poor judgment by driving impaired. Probably the large majority do so successfully without any kind of incident. And that reinforces a negative reality. The point is, just because you've driven many, many times impaired does not mean that you're a threat to yourself or other people. And because our enforcement is still quite challenged, it usually takes something clearly obvious or a tragedy or something to trigger law enforcement's attention before we're able to wake people up.
I work a lot with teenagers, and that their primary drug that they use is marijuana. And to get through, especially in today's world with the lackadaisical attitudes about the use of marijuana, to try to get through to a 14, 15, 16-year-old who's been using marijuana that this stuff will negatively impact you is sort of a difficult challenge in the world of adolescent treatment. One of the things that I like to do is on a board, I will put a timeline and I will ask them to, let's take the next year, pinpoint for me exactly when your negative consequence is going to happen, right? And of course, none of them can do that. And that's the point, is that when you are impairing yourself, whether you're driving or otherwise, when you're putting drugs in your system, that you are going to always experience some sort of a negative consequence. When that's going to happen, nobody can ever predict. And then I take it a step further and I say, and you also can't predict what the severity of that consequence is going to be. It may be as simple as a hangover tomorrow, but it may be as severe as taking somebody else's life or your own. And you can't predict when that's going to happen. So it is a crapshoot every time. It's a crapshoot. So we want people to be careful. We want people to be aware of the dangers, and we want, especially, we want to be able to utilize any kind of tools that we can. There are devices now that can measure under the influence of other drugs besides alcohol, such as marijuana, correct?
Yes, there are. There are a number of tools that have been proven to be effective in identifying drug impairment, and a lot of them have to do with oral swabbing, or what they call oral fluids, which is basically your saliva. Over 5 different kinds of drugs, actually 6 different kinds of drugs, many of them the machines are able to identify. But what the public should know is that law enforcement is never authorized just to pull you over out of just some kind of hunch and require you to submit to some kind of chemical test without some kind of path of preparation to raise a reasonable suspicion.
So as a highway patrolman, you're driving down the street, you're driving down at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you see a car out there. You're looking for certain signs. Maybe the way somebody's sitting when they're driving, maybe the way the car's swerving or not swerving, maybe the speed that they're going or not going inside of a certain speed limit gives you reasonable suspicion. Then you pull over and you look for other signs, which is what you're talking about now.
Exactly right. And so there has to be a path of preparation to help you establish the reasonable suspicion. And then once that is reached, then there's another step that needs to take place, and they have to administer what are known as field sobriety tests. And they would differentiate from just alcohol field sobriety tests, many of them to look towards drug because the impairment is a bit different.
Right.
For example,
of the drug. Yeah.
I'll give you an example. One of the tests that is used often for drug impairment is what is called the Romberg internal clock, which is where the officer will ask the person under suspicion to estimate 30 seconds. Now, somebody who's under the influence of alcohol would not have as much difficulty as someone who's under the influence of THC or some other kind of drug.
Right.
And so, yeah, and those are the kinds of tools we need more of. And we have legislation that's going to allow, we have a task force that it's going to be established here in the near future as a result of legislation that passed just a few weeks ago to set up a task force that will evaluate best practices and to make a selection of the kind of equipment that we need to put in the hands of law enforcement so that they can make these very fair and accurate assessments of someone's impairment, not just usage.
Well, I tell you what, there's always, no matter what the consequences are, no matter what the negative effects, like we were talking about earlier, unfortunately, sometimes it takes a tragedy for people to go, okay, wait a minute, there's something going on here. With drugs and alcohol, they've been around for so very long, and it's one of the greatest challenges that I think our society will ever face. It certainly is one of the most impactful things that our society will ever face. That's why we use words like epidemic when we talk about opioids. That's why we use, terms like that. And so we have, as a result of that, some of the sort of good that comes out of that is that we have had the ability as a society scientifically to study the effects of drugs and alcohol for a very long time. And so we know the difference between how marijuana affects you in the brain versus how alcohol affects you in the brain. And so, we can come up with best practices. Mm-hmm. What are we looking for in somebody? How are the pupils dilated? How do they smell? How do they look? How are they acting? Do they have that internal clock going on? And all that sort of thing.
Yeah, one of the things that we're very, very proud of, too, is the fact that we were able to pass legislation that authorized UC San Diego to establish the fact that not only is THC impairing, but to craft field sobriety tests specific to potential impairment related to THC. Right. And so there's like some iPad tests that they're crafting, as well as this internal clock and some other field sobriety tests. They're able to make sure that we're capturing impairment and not just usage.
Must get a little bit tricky when you have, because a lot of people that are using drugs or drinking they're not just using one, right? So you have a mixture of somebody's coming in, they're taking some opiates and maybe taking some benzodiazepines or something, smoking mm-hmm. some pot and drinking a couple of beers, and you have to really be trained in differentiating what all of that is.
You bring up a very valid point, because that is becoming extremely popular, is to actually mix alcohol with any kind of drug usage, because most law enforcement are fairly adept at identifying alcohol impairment. Right. And so when they see the impairment, they only suspect alcohol. And so they test for alcohol impairment, and then there's evidence that they're low on the alcohol, and they'll release them, not thinking about the synergy that may have been created by a combined usage. And the UC San Diego study is also identifying that challenge as well.
Right. And you have a lot of, like, say, alcohol, for instance, and you take a benzodiazepine, commonly like a Xanax or an Ativan or a Valium or something like that. Those medications right there are so similar in their chemical makeup to alcohol that they will use those types of medications to actually detox off of alcohol for somebody who needs to come down off alcohol, because it's almost exactly the same. But when you combine those two drugs right there, they have an effect on each other where they will exacerbate each other and the effects. So you take somebody that may have, honestly tell you, how much have you had to drink tonight? I've only had one beer, sir, but I'm not telling you about the 2 or 3 Valium that I've taken.
That's
And
right.
when you combine those things, you got somebody who's standing in front of you that looks, oh my God, they're so drunk they can't stand up. But wait a minute, the alcohol is only showing a .06 or something, you know?
Yeah, that's right. That's called the synergy impact, right? When you combine the two, they provide a unique impairing component. And so those are the kinds of things that weren't as prevalent just even 5 years ago. This phenomenon has grown substantially in the last couple of years.
Right.
And so, and I have a belief that it's going to continue to grow. And so there's a sense of urgency to establish public policy that protects the public. And I think that we're very excited to be doing that very thing, and the public should be very proud of the fact that we as a state legislature are doing that and doing our level best.
Well, it certainly is great to have organizations and persons like yourself that are championing safety issues inside of this ever-changing world of drugs. When we come back, we'll talk about more of the impacts of the different propositions and the different laws that are out there. This is Bob Scher. It's the Way Out Recovery Hour. We'll be back in a moment.
Come join me, Arif Halby, for Total Financial Solutions Safer Money Hour. Every Tuesday at noon, we uncover ways to help you manage your money, get out of debt, and prepare for your retirement. That's every Tuesday at noon on Total Financial Solutions Safer Money Hour. Are you not sure if you can retire yet? Listen to us and learn about tips for savings, retirement strategies, and so much more. That's every Tuesday at noon on Total Financial Solutions Safer Money Hour on your hometown station, AM 1220, KHTS.
At Aliento, we put a modern twist on resort-style living. Come see for yourself this Saturday from 4 to 7 p.m. at the Aliento Back to School Summer Concert and Barbecue. Tour our model homes. Then, stick around for barbecue, lemonade, and ice cream. Plus, kids' activities and live music from Dole Humphreys. That's this Saturday, August 12th from 4 to 7 p.m. at the Terrace at Aliento, just off the 14 at Golden Valley Road in Santa Clarita. See you there. For more information, visit alientoliving.com/summer.
There are fun kids events at the Church on the Way Santa Clarita. 2 to 5-year-olds meet at the Arc Room on Fridays for toddler exercise time. New moms come to the Church on the Way Santa Clarita on Tuesdays for a new, free Moms Fellowship. Support, friendship, and social events for moms and their babies. Visit tcotwsc.org for these and other exciting events at the Church on the Way Santa Clarita on Cinema Drive, or call 291-6000.
Aloha, friends! We invite you to come by Honu Coffee, home of the best cold brewed coffee. What makes our coffee special is how our organic coffee beans are infused with nitrogen to create a smooth and delicious cup of coffee. You'll also find traditional bold coffees and island-inspired signature drinks. We're the perfect place to catch up with friends or just relax with your favorite cup of joe. Honu Coffee on Lyons Avenue and Walnut in Newhall. Stop by and say aloha!
Hometown Station. We fall so hard, now we gotta get back up, we lost.
Welcome back to the Way Out Recovery Hour. I'm Bob Sheritz. We are in studio today with Assemblyman Tom Lackey. A very exciting show for you. Remember that the Way Out is an intensive outpatient program. We are here in Santa Clarita. We work with adolescents, adults, and their families to try to combat the drug epidemic that is everywhere, but certainly in our own hometown right here in Santa Clarita. We are at 661-296-4444. Our website is thewayoutrecoveryscv.com. Remember that asking for help is the first step, and you can make a phone call right now if you want to. We've been talking about the changing laws in the drug world and how as lawmakers and legislatures and people that are concerned with safety that are around the ever-changing laws, that we make sure that the laws are changing to accommodate things like we were talking about before the break, driving while under the influence, not just of alcohol, but of any intoxicant. Colorado was sort of was the first state to really lead the way in terms of not only medical usage, but recreational usage for the public, dispensaries, things like that. So Colorado has been really kind of a let's stand back and watch Colorado. Let's see what happens. Let's see what the impact is. Sort of a big experiment. And I'll tell you that the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area has attempted to track the impact of marijuana legislation in the state of California. And there were some studies that were done between the years of '06 and up until current. The studies are still going on. And many of the people that will argue for, and this is certainly not an argument as to whether or not medical marijuana has its efficacy, whether or not it's okay to have recreational use of marijuana. I'm not getting into that debate. There are a lot of pros and cons, and I think that both sides of them, the pros and cons, have some very legitimate arguments. Excuse me. But let me tell you, in that study, some of the things that have come out of Colorado, just because of the availability, the recreational use, the availability of medical use, the tremendous increase in dispensaries and caregivers for medical, as well as people that are utilizing marijuana. Marijuana-related exposure. So this is unintentional exposure to cannabis in all of its forms, whether you're talking edible or inhalation. Marijuana-related exposures for children from 0 to 5 years old, on average, have increased 268% from '06 to '09. Colorado's rate of marijuana-related exposure is triple the national average. So we're talking about things like kids getting a hold of their parents' gummy, THC-laced candies and things like that. Marijuana falling on the floor, being in rooms where people are using marijuana. So unintentional exposure, 0 to 5 years old. Again, the increase is 268% from what it was prior to that. Emergency room marijuana admissions. From 2011 to 2013, there was a 57% increase in marijuana-related emergency room visits. Hospitalization related to marijuana have increased 82% from 2008 to 2013. A lot of that has to do with not only the availability of it, but the increased potency of the marijuana that's available today as opposed to what it was before. Adult marijuana use. The national average is 18.89% of college students admit to using marijuana. In Colorado, 26.81%, so it's higher there. Youth marijuana, overall national average is 7.55% of youth admit to using marijuana. In Colorado, it is 10.47%, so it's a higher rate of exposure to youth as well. And I think something that's really relevant to Assemblyman Lackey sitting in the room today is impaired driving. For those of you who think it doesn't have an impact, pay attention to this. Traffic fatalities involved operators testing positive for marijuana have increased 100% from '07 to 2012. The majority of driving under the influence of drugs arrests involved marijuana. 25 to 40% were marijuana alone. So people are driving around impaired enough to where they are causing crashes and in some cases fatalities with no other drugs in their system but marijuana. And so we can argue all day long about whether or not we think it's good for you or bad for you or whatever, and that's really not the point. The point is exactly what we were stating earlier, is that if you are going to be using any of these drugs, that you take measurable steps to not be behind the wheel, to not leave stuff around for your kids to pick up, and all the other tragedies that go along with any drug use. But with marijuana, just the same as any other drug use. We talked earlier about devices and field sobriety tests that are specific to marijuana. Something else that you were talking about before the show is what's kind of like the equivalent of an open container when it comes to driving around with alcohol. So no usage in the car. Hot boxing, any of the kids that are listening are going to know exactly what hot boxing is, right? The very popular thing, roll up all the windows, put so much smoke in the car that everybody in the car gets intoxicated, right? But there are laws enacted now, very recent, that are changing that. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and this is a recent change. This has happened within the last month.
Okay.
So this is something the public should be aware of, that it's treated, as you indicated, similar to alcohol. You cannot have open any kind of cannabis that's accessible to the driver is not permitted within the interior of a vehicle. And so even though it's a legal commodity, you cannot have it within the interior of a vehicle where the driver could have access, and even the passenger smoking or even ingesting an edible and having open edibles or that kind of thing is not legal to actually have within the interior of a car. And so what we hope to do is we hope to educate. Education is clearly the goal, and prevention is always the goal in allowing a successful policy to take place. However, there are some people that are not going to get the news, and then the enforcement aspect is a way to educate. It's a tougher one, but nonetheless, it could be a tool to shape behavior, and that's what it's all about, is to prevent tragedy. And that's the reason why we're having policies like this. Even possession within the car, is it will prevent tragedy. And that's really what people fail to understand. They don't understand the real purpose behind the legislation, and that is to make sure that we don't have these circumstances like this teacher who came up and shared her story. So we don't have these kinds of tragedies happening around us, because she's evidence that it happens not just in Colorado, it's happening here. And we're thankful for the fact that Colorado is sharing good information with us so that we can learn from their experience. And that's what this legislature is trying to do, is learn from their experience. But we should know this, that Colorado's situation is they don't have near the amount of traffic we do, near the amount of people who are going to be utilizing this or who are actually using it now. And so their experience is just, in my opinion, going to be a snapshot of what we can expect here. So we all need to collectively work together to communicate openly and partner in preventing tragedy.
Well, and Los Angeles County is a champion and wonderful trendsetters in a lot of areas. We are really a magnificent county, magnificent cities that we have out here. Everybody wants to come to California and come to Los Angeles, but when you talk about the number, we're also ahead of the traffic. Everybody knows about Los Angeles traffic. And when you said that, it reminded me, when we talk about these things in Colorado, right, 100% increase in drug-related fatalities since all these new drug laws have come out. I don't know what the percentage in Los Angeles would be, but you certainly have a tremendous amount of people more on the road here than just about anywhere else in the world, really. And so you're right, it's going to be the same thing happening here, tenfold maybe, tenfold. And when we're not in the business of telling people whether or not they can responsibly drink or even use marijuana or anything else that's okay to use. We're certainly not in the business of telling people about their medications and what's okay and what's not okay. But we are in the business of educating, like you said. And the more that you can put the word out there, and the more people that will listen to it, that we will save lives. That we will save lives. And one of the things that I think certainly people know, but it bears stating, is that this is preventable. All of these tragedies that go right along with all the drug use and all the different stuff is absolutely preventable. It doesn't have to happen. And so we can certainly spread the word and cut down on these tragedies.
Well, and that's really, the sum of my experience with the California Highway Patrol is the real tragedy associated with almost every one of those circumstances where I had to make a death notification. They were all preventable circumstances. And now you have the loss of life, which is the most extreme consequence you can imagine. And so my responsibility now in the position that I hold, having those experiences is to try to shape policy that will possibly prevent those kinds of circumstances. And the best way to prevent is to educate. It really is. And it's unfortunate that sometimes that education process includes enforcement. As you were talking about Prop 47, and one of the unintended consequences for Prop 47 is we have less people being forced into diversion programs. Right. Diversion programs are, for those who don't know, are basically programs that help people break addiction. And we have so many people that are caught in an addiction cycle that don't know how to get out. They just don't know how. And this diversion process was the only way many of them can escape the addiction that they're in. And so because of that lessened ability of guiding people into a preventable situation, we got more tragedy. And I think that that's unfortunate.
Well, so Proposition 47, was intended to free up the jail system a little bit. And to take nonviolent offenders for things like petty thefts, minor possessions, and reduce them from felonies to misdemeanors, so that more people could access treatment, so that more people would not have to sit in prison. And like you say, the unintentional consequence is this. Well, let's talk about it on both levels. From a petty theft standpoint,
it's terrible.
There are people. So what used to happen is you had a felony for a thing called petty with a prior. So you get a petty theft, you've had prior petty thefts, it automatically becomes a felony no matter what the price of the thing that you stole is, right? And that has gone away now. And so you have people that are repeat offenders. I read about one guy who got arrested 16 times in a month. 16 times in a month. And when they interview him in this paper, it says, he's like, well, it's not a big deal anymore. I can do it as much as I want. They just write me a ticket. So that's one of the unintentional consequences. And something that I read, I might have read it on your website or on a link on your website, was there are gangs or
conspiracy groups
that are capitalizing on that. What's that all about?
No, actually, also there are a number of unintended consequences, because now, if it's under the dollar amount threshold, which is around $900, it's just a citable offense, and it's each offense $900. It's not a cumulative. We actually tried to craft legislation that made it cumulative, but that didn't fly. And so it's unfortunate we've empowered the wrong people to feel a little empowered to go and steal. I don't think that was ever the intention of anybody who supported Prop 47. Right. But it is the unintended consequences, because now they're organizing, and the retail centers are really having a difficult time. And quite frankly, the retailers are not the only ones suffering, because it raises the cost to the consumer as well when they have to try to make up for those losses. So it hurts us all, and it empowers the wrong people. And theft is a very unique circumstances, is that people steal for different reasons, and because it's not something that people enjoy, I don't think. Well, there are some people that have an addiction, I suppose, but I don't think that's the majority. I think the majority of the people are stealing for a reason.
A lot of times there's drug use involved in that.
And I think a high percentage has to do with drug use. So it is not independent of what we've been talking about today, is because a lot of people feel trapped. They don't have a way to support the financial demand of their habit, and so they resort to stealing, and Prop 47 made it easier for them to do that. And so we're feeding that addiction indirectly, and it's very tragic.
As well as possessions of drugs now, under a certain amount and in certain circumstances are misdemeanors as well. And
That's
so
correct.
citable offenses as well.
So they're more comfortable carrying the contraband and feeding their addiction. So that's another I don't think that was ever the intention, that people would ever think that they would be making it easier for the addicted to stay addicted, but that's what's happening.
Well, and I bet law enforcement must be very frustrated with, I've read several reports where in a lot of cities, law enforcement almost says, kind of why bother? I mean, they don't have a why bother attitude. I don't think anybody in law enforcement does, but geez, I've seen this guy 16 times this month. Like, what, I'm just going to write him another ticket. And so they're almost just kind of driving past the drug user and saying, yeah, it's just a possession. And you can see that in the number of arrests have dropped and things like that. And so it must be frustrating for law enforcement as well.
Well, when it becomes a lower priority, it isn't like the demands for law enforcement have subsided.
Right.
And so you go to your greatest threat. And the greatest threat no longer is drug possession, according to the people, because the people are the ones that drive that drives law enforcement's perspective and their priorities. They've weighed in and said that they believe that drug enforcement is a low priority, and so that's the way the mindset is, and that's the way it's carried out.
Yeah. And, and what used to happen with felonies, you were talking about diversions, is, with a felony conviction, a judge or different enforcement agencies had the ability to say to somebody, hey, we will take this prison offense and divert it over here if you complete these programs. And what was happening is it was forcing a lot of people to go into the programs. And one of the myths that I'm gonna leave people a little cliffhanger because we're gonna take a break right now. But the idea is this: think about it while you're sitting here on this break. Is there any difference between somebody who's forced into treatment, success-wise, recovery-wise, versus somebody who walks in the door on their own accord? Many people think that you have to want it in order to get it. And when we come back after this break, we'll talk a little bit about that and reveal whether or not that is a myth. I'm Bob Sheritz. This is the Way Out Recovery Hour, and we'll be right back after this.
You're constantly on the go. Why not be on the go in the comfort, style, and safety of a new Nissan from Valencia Nissan?
Bob Bailey, Executive Manager at Valencia Nissan, where Bob or any of his helpful, friendly staff can assist you with incredible savings on summer specials on the 2017 Nissan Versa, Sentra, Altima, or the new Nissan Juke SUV.
You're always welcome at Valencia Nissan, where we make your automotive dreams come true.
Your nails have amazing shine. What polish is that?
It's a gel manicure from Forever Nails and Spa.
What's a gel manicure?
It's a manicure that uses a special polish using a UV light. The polish has incredible shine and lasts for up to 14 days without chipping.
14 days? I've never heard of a polish lasting that long.
It's a great way to extend your manicure and save money on polish changes and touch-ups.
Located on the old road at Valencia Boulevard. Visit forevernailsandspa.com.
KHTS is searching for veterans who are looking to start a new career. We've teamed with the Lifton Institute right here in Santa Clarita. If you're a vet, they've designed a program just for you. In 10 short weeks, you'll develop the skills to land a job in the film and TV industries. Lifton graduates are placed in industry jobs. Free, unique career training right here in Santa Clarita. Visit jobsforscvvets.com. There's no catch. It's free, but it's up to you. jobsforscvvets.com.
There's only one Santa Clarita plastic surgeon who is Yale trained and board certified, Dr. Justin Heller.
To be a board certified plastic surgeon like myself, what that truly entails is about 5 to 7 years of honed surgical training in reconstructive, all areas, as well as aesthetic, so which means your facelifts, your breast augmentations, your body contouring, true training, and board certification. In fact, that's the only board certified area that can be achieved in this realm.
Dr. Justin Heller, warm, understanding, always available for guidance because he's local. HellerPlasticSurgery.com.
KHTS. We fall so hard. Now we gotta get back what we lost. I thought you'd go, but you were with me all alone.
Welcome back to the Way Out Recovery Hour. I'm Bob Sheritz, and We have in studio with us today Assemblyman Tom Lackey. We have been talking about some very, very big topics. Before we took our break, I asked the question, I asked for you to think about this. Do you think there's any difference between success rates in those who walk through the door on their own and those that are forced through the door, right? And so that is on the heels of the conversation about Proposition 47. Proposition 47 has taken many felonies and dropped them down to misdemeanors, especially for minor offenses. What used to happen is somebody would get busted with some illegal substances, and it would be a felony, and then the judges or whoever could force them into treatment. And so more people were becoming exposed to treatment, as opposed to now, people are not even walking through the door. And I'll tell you the answer to the question is no. There have been many, many studies that say that the success rate of those two populations, those who are forced and those who do it on their own, is exactly the same at the end of 1 year. Sobriety rate. How many people have abstained from drugs and alcohol at the end of 1 year in those two categories? And the studies show that it's exactly the same number. And so what we conclude from that is that you don't have to want it in order to get it. You have to be exposed to it in order to get it. So the exposure rates to treatment have dropped. I read this morning that diversion rates in Los Angeles County, the number of persons that are being diverted to drug programs has dropped by 50%.
That's bad.
By 50%. So there's 50% less people that are being exposed to drug treatment, which means that that same number don't have an opportunity to hear the message of recovery inside of the door, and that's one of the unintentional consequences.
And I'll tell you there's another challenge, because recently we also introduced legislation that when somebody was convicted of a DUI offense that involved drugs, we wanted to add additional instruction for them as part of their sentence.
Right.
And it was resisted and rejected. And so it was seen as punishment to make them go through this educational process to help them understand the real threat that they are exposing themselves and other people to. So we've got work to do. We've got to help people understand that a lot of the way that they've been thinking is not accurate, because there's a safety component to this. It's not just whether you agree or disagree, whether you're conservative or not conservative, or whether you're left or right. It's whether or not you want to be a threat or not. And so, and right now we're in such a politically volatile atmosphere. We need to find a way to just knock that away, especially when we talk about topics that impact us all the way they do. I mean, this could be literally life or death.
Yeah, there's a lot of, in the world of the divided sides today, where everybody is unfriending each other on Facebook and publicly berating each other, and it's just, it's a horrible thing in itself. But because there's so much emotion involved in what side am I on, that it can be a real difficulty for me to take a step back and really look at this is not necessarily a black and white issue. There are a lot of nuances in the middle of this that we need to work through.
Well, I think this is an opportunity, is what I'm trying to say. This is an opportunity for us to unite together, because I don't care what your political preference is. No one wants tragedy.
Right. Let's
no
talk
one
safety.
wants tragedy. Let's do everything we can to prevent tragedy. And I think this is an opportunity for Republicans, Democrats, Independents, whatever party you are, to unite on an issue, and let's support education. Let's support legislation that prevents tragedy, and I think that's something we can all agree on.
It is something we can all agree on, but I bet you that you've been met with some resistance when you've been trying to get some of the different laws and ordinances and whatever passed, to make it safer. When you're talking about it right now, I'm going, yeah, it makes perfect sense. Of course it does. Anybody who's listening, it makes perfect sense. Let's make the world a safer place. But even in the middle of that, I'll bet you're met with a lot of resistance, huh?
Well, let's just see. There's been a lot of misunderstanding. There's misunderstanding both by my conservative friends and my left-thinking friends. Especially when you talk about marijuana, a lot of people automatically take a perception, whatever that perception is, that it's this evil thing.
It's either good or bad.
Or it
right?
doesn't impact us.
Right.
I mean, those are the two extremes, right? And really, the fact remains, let's discuss it, because neither one of those are completely accurate or completely false. So let's bring together the common ground and let's do what the public expects us to do, because we're much stronger when we work together instead of independently. But it has been a mysterious challenge, but we're up for it.
Well, I tell you, just in the midst of this last hour, my brain's been thinking of, so what are some good ideas to add to, because I really believe in treatment. I really, really believe that treatment saves lives, that anybody that we can force or suggest or whatever into the doors of some sort of a treatment facility, that they're going to have a better chance, And so even if it's a misdemeanor drug offense, let's make part of that, not just pay the fine, but let's make part of it. You have to go to some classes. You have to get some sort of an education. Before the break was over, last time I sort of jokingly said, but it doesn't sound like such a bad idea. Before you're allowed to buy some recreational marijuana at one of the dispensaries, sit down and watch a 5-minute video on educating you on not driving under the influence, on how much it does impact people, on what careful practices look like. We have some of that stuff in place for alcohol, but it almost seems we should have that in the middle of a liquor store as well, like the safety issues.
Right.
We would the biggest resistance I think that we'd be met with on that level would be from the people selling the alcohol. Right, it impacts our sales, so back off on that. But the more education that we can provide, the more safety we can provide. And I am a huge believer. We got a couple of minutes, and I want to personalize a little bit to just publicly say a couple of things about being forced into treatment. I had mentioned a name to you earlier, Judge Estes, out in the Antelope Valley. And I'll tell you that I've had the opportunity to write him a letter and to thank him. But, I'm coming up on 12 years ago, I changed my life. And I would have never done that if I wasn't sitting in the courtroom with Judge Estes in the Antelope Valley, giving me an opportunity to go to treatment rather than go to prison. And so I think that the more laws that are enacted for us to force people like myself into a treatment facility rather than to house them in a prison, the more opportunity we can have for things like that, the better off we are. Because I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for that.
Yeah, there's also an aspect of the uncomfortable nature of enforcement. As a lot of times, treatment programs are another tool and another partner in getting people to change behavior. That is really the goal when you engaged in something that's a threat to somebody, is that you don't repeat that offense.
Right.
And whether it's an instruction or whether it's a negative consequences, sometimes negative consequences in themselves can be life-changing. And I could name you a number of stories. One just recently being a person who I placed under arrest for being impaired, who was from a law enforcement family. And he recently engaged a close friend of mine and had indicated that he was so profoundly impacted by that event in a positive way that he now is law enforcement. And so there are good things that come from negative experiences, because an arrest is a negative experience, let's be honest. And so we just need to collectively recognize what changes behavior and work towards doing that so we prevent tragedy.
That's right. We're all about preventing tragedy. Tom, I want to thank you very, very much for being on the show today. The listeners that are out there, that they're going to see this streaming live, that I know that as a result of you being on this show today, that we are going to save some lives and we are going to help with the safety of this ever-changing world of drugs. So this is Bob Sherritt's The Way Out Recovery. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll see you next week.